Block number 9 is night and noon. It's located here in our layout and is your background number 1 if you're alternating backgrounds for the checkerboard design. Cross Canoes, our first block, is also the same background, 1. This looks like a 9-patch Ohio star with little strip pieced corners, such as this. Let's just set this down. You can take a look at it here. With the seam allowances, it's sort of a bit distorted, but now we can see that we have the hourglass in these sections and a square that's made of pieces and a single square in the center. However, this is not easily paper pieced if it's constructed that way. An hourglass is not an easy block to create with one piece of foundation paper. So what it looks like is this. We're going to have a center block like we did in our previous block. It's a square on point. We won't be adding borders as we did last time. We'll be adding 2 sections that will give us the opposite corners, and then the same piece but with the 2 triangles to create the hourglass that shows up in this area. This makes it possible to use the foundation paper. Cutting instructions are listed on your notes page that's attached to the video and also included in the email to members. We'll be cutting from squares and we'll be cutting some strips. So from our lights, which again is our light number 1, our background number 1, we'll be using 2 1/4 squares cut diagonally once. We will need 4 of them to give us our 8 triangles. And I've turned these all right side up so that we can use them for stacking our pieces. We also have a small triangle that's 1 1/2 inch square. We need 2 of these to make 4 of our tiny triangles. And we need 4 strips that are 1 inch by, 1 inch by 2 1/2. Our medium is going to be our center square. That's cut from a 2 inch piece. Again, we have strips, as we'll recognize will go into the corners. So our medium, again, 1 by 2 1/2. We need 4 squares that are 2 1/4 of our dark, and that'll give us triangles as well for the Ohio star section. Hourglass pieces. And then we need smaller ones for the very outside triangles of our strippy squares. So that's a 2 inch square cut diagonally once. Again, these are all stacked right side up so we can assemble them for the units that we need. I've tidied up the piles just a little bit so we have more space to show the stacking procedure for our units. If your printer doesn't make a very clear distinguishing mark between the dark and the medium and the light, you can make some indications on your paper so that you know what they are. I've put a D on the darks and an M just on this one. That was all I found that I needed on mine. You can use a coloring marker, a pencil, crayon, or something light. You have to be careful with tools on our paper because they may press onto our surface. So a light pencil is probably sufficient. Okay, so unit A starts with our medium. We'll take these, they're all set up right side up, and we're going to flip them over as we go so that they're in the order that we need. So we'll flip the A unit 1 over here, and then we have not the smallest triangles because we have that for this tiny spot here. The larger triangles will be going on opposite sides both ways, so we need 2 for 2 and 3 and 2 for 4 and 5. That's our A unit. We'll flip it over so it's ready to go and set that aside. Now the B and C units are actually similar in the center. You can see that section is the same. The unit C just adds the triangles on the outside. So we could stack for all 4. We have 2 B's and 2 C's. So let's just sort of pile that as we go here. It's important, it's really helpful to do this with this particular block because this triangle and this triangle don't look very different when we have them stacked. They actually look different now, but when you pick up 2 and you put them on the table and pick them up again, it's really difficult to distinguish unless you actually measure the side. So if we keep them separate, we know that we only need 4 of these and 8 of these. We'll stack our 2 piles for Unit B and 2 piles for Unit C. So we'll start with our 1, which is a light. So we're going to take all 4 of these and we'll put them down. Let's move these up here, see if we can make our piles tidily. And then we have this one. It's like dealing them out. Everybody gets the same. Our 3 is the smaller of the dark blocks. I'll move this up so you can see a little better. 3 is the same for these units. So they each get 1 of these. Our tiny triangles are going to go in for number 4. 5 and 6 are both the larger triangles, so we can give them 2 each. And the remaining triangles are going to go only on the C piles. 2 for one of them and 2 for the other. So we can flip them over. Let's go B. We have 1 unit for B. My other paper is here. Here's a C unit and the other C unit. So we're all set to take it to the sewing machine and get our units constructed. Let's begin with our Unit A. We have our stack from the cutting table and our little paper piece. We're going to make our first crease between 1 and 2. And get our first fabric ready. It's a medium 2-inch square, and it's going to be right side down as all of our beginning pieces are, and it'll go underneath the paper. And we can set this up with a little bit of glue so that we know where it needs to be and it'll hold it. So let's scooch this up a little bit until we have 1/4 of an inch beyond the fold. And our paper has been trimmed about the same amount on each side, so we can just center this, hold it in place to just apply a little bit to the paper. And that'll hold for us. All right, we're going to add number 2, and that is the right angle triangle cut from a 2 1/4 inch square. And we're going to be sewing the long side. As you can see here, it's the long side of the triangle. The right angle is going to be on the bottom, below. So we'll center this as best we can. We've cut them with ample fabric, so as long as it's extending beyond our paper, we know we have it positioned well. Just sewing from this point to this point on this seam. A quick flip and finger press, and then a hot press. Okay, we'll add the other triangle in the same way. Now this time we'll be sewing from the very top right through off the end this way. Here's one of our 2 Unit B sections. We'll flip it around so the number 1 is on our left and 2 is on our right, and we'll create our crease for our initial seam. We know that our first piece is always going to be face down, and we'll be sewing one long side to the second piece, which is our medium. So we can just set these up first and then take it to the machine and fold this over so that we have a 1/4 inch. And if we keep even pressure on the paper underneath, we'll be able to get a straight seam. You could stick a pin in here if you wish, just to hold it, or a clip. And we'll flip this open. Okay, number 3 is a dark one, and it's a smaller of the triangles, but we've stacked them in the right order, so we shouldn't have to check that. You could if you're not sure, but if you go with the system, you got to trust the system. Okay, now it's a little tricky to see where this triangle is, so let's use the pin markers again. We can tell that the right angle is going to be in the bottom, so we know which way it's positioned. All of these triangles are being added along the long side. So we'll make a little pin mark here and here. And for ease, we'll just kind of draw this right angle here with a pencil so we can see where that's going to be. We can keep our pins in if we wish. Did we trim that? Looks like a generous 1/4 inch. So we're going to align it just behind our seam allowance because we don't want that dark to show through. And we've got about the same amount on each side of our pins. And we know that the bright angle is on the bottom. We're all set. The seam is going all the way from one seam allowance edge to the other seam allowance edge. All right, we're going to add our next triangle, which is the smaller background fabric triangle. We don't need to trim this one, it's already nice and tight. These strips that we cut were pretty precise for sizing, not a lot of extra this time, just saved on the fabric. Okay, again, we can mark our triangle from here to here. And you can kind of see through the paper, but if you want to put a pin in here, that'll give you a hole. That's also a handy marker. Then we can connect our dots. We can see where our triangle is going to be. Then we're just going to give us ourselves enough space on each edge, just putting it up a little higher so you can see it, and then we'll just slide it down into position behind the other fabric. It's even with the raw edge. The raw edges are even. All right, now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We're looking for 5. We'll just make this crease, and this is where we're going to turn our little strips into the shape that we need by trimming this off. All right. Can you tell which way the triangle is going? Again, it's going to be the long side. Right angle is going to be down in the bottom here. So we'll take our dark, long side, aligned here. And what I'm looking to do is match up the edge of this here parallel there, and it's beyond that fold, and also parallel to the paper on this side, just beyond the fold. Then we know we have ample, and that's why we cut our squares a little bit bigger to start, so we have some room to scooch if we need to, and to trim, so we get it very precise when we're squaring it up. The seam is going just from the raw edge to this intersection. One more triangle to add. This is where if you go sew a little beyond, you'll have a bit of stitch to pull back, but that's okay. Here's our last triangle. Again, we're going to align it with the right angle at the bottom and watching the edges of the paper and that line extending through the dog ears. Here's our first unit B. Go ahead and repeat the same method for unit B, the other unit B, and then we'll get to unit C and get as far as these 4 pieces before we get to add on our remaining triangles. I'm filming, but I'm not going to be talking. I'm just going to do fast forward. So.
No, I didn't have any
peas.
There was no peas. I wanted
Oh, neither freezer? I thought maybe there were.
there was beans, but no peas.
Oh, that's
no
funny.
Corn either, so. Well, there was corn.
Oh, I was going to say, I knew one of them.
Yeah, there was no peas.
Because we often buy them to keep things cold. Now that we have 1 through 4 on, this piece is a little different than our B piece, simply because we've got these extra triangles on either side. So to be sure that we aren't getting confused with how this goes, if you've remembered it from the last time, it may work well. But just to be sure, there's something tricky about the triangle that we're going to add now. So I thought I'd slow down at least for you to see, and I can explain how to be sure that your triangle is going in the right direction. So we always need to watch for this right angle, and as you can see, it's going to be, here's my pin, here. And again, we're going to be adding the long side of the triangle. So that helps us a lot. Because this piece of paper, if you just look at this piece of paper right here that we folded, that looks like the shape of the triangle that we should be adding. And it would be very simple to pick up our piece and say, oh, it matches, and then put it on the wrong side by using one of the short sides. But what we are going to be doing is the triangle is going this way. Because our triangle is cut larger, it looks like it fits the other way, but that won't work. So we want to be sure that our triangle is going to go with the right angle this side, and the long side sewn on this edge. So we'll align it so that we have a little bit of dog ear beyond the fold here. And we have quite a bit on this side because our seam line is coming here, so we have lots for this extra edge too. So we'll add this one. We'll do the same on the other side, and then we'll put our final background triangles on. So as you can see, we've got it as far as our other B units, but we'll be adding the last two triangles on. Here's our B and our C. It doesn't really matter which side you do, but we'll go with our number system to make a habit consistent. Unit C complete. Repeat for the other one and we'll look at putting it all together. All the foundation pieces have been assembled. The stitching is all done. We're going to do some trimming. It's been given a good press, a firm final press with a larger iron than the tiny one, and a bit of starch or best press type product. And we're going to set these aside and square our center one first. So we'll use all the lines on the ruler that we can to help us determine what the seam allowance edges are. So I'm going to use the corner diagonal line going through here, and I'm ensuring that I have my straight line a 1/4 inch from the edge of the ruler, here and here. I've got the dots along there. Looks nice and sturdy. So we'll trim off our dog ears and extra fabric. Rotate 180 degrees and position again. We're determining the size of this piece with seam allowance based on the sewing line and not on a dimension. Not all paper piece pattern sections are actual typical sizes. All right, Unit A is ready, so we'll look at a Unit B. And we're going to trim just the sides that we'll be sewing in the process. So let's see, we're going to be leaving this corner out, and we'll trim that after we've put the whole block together. We will need this one done for sure, and we will be sewing this side along that edge as well. So let's take these 3 sides off of our Unit B. Two we can do as a right angle, and then we'll just rotate it to do this last side here. I'll use a row of dots on my sewing line here just to be sure that that's going to be square, that this right angle is a perfect 90 degrees. Okay, we'll do this one quickly. And then for this one, we're just going to do the long straight edge on each of the unit C. As we did in the last block, we'll utilize the diagonal line on a line as well. Ensure that you have a 1/4 inch from the dash line to your sewing line. All right, starting to come together. To set these up for assembly, we want to be sure that the lines of the seams are going the same way, so that when we flip this over, that they're going the opposite way, as we demonstrated on the work table. To make sure that they are aligned properly, I'm going to grab a pin and pop it in right in the section here where the seams intersect. Poke it through and then align this one so that the pin pokes through as well where the seams come together at the top of this peak. I'm going to hold it nice and straight so it's perpendicular to the seam, because if we bend it now to push the pin in and out, it's going to alter that intersection the slightest bit. We're talking threads here. So I'm going to just pop a clip on this side of it and a clip out this side of it and bring it to the machine. We've got our 1/4 inch now, a little bit longer seam allowance. I'm going to take the pin out because it's going to be in the way. And we're going to sew a 1/4 inch. If you haven't done so, switch to your 1/4 inch foot. If you still have your open toe foot on, you're going to need to change that. I'm going to go very carefully into this seam. And if you have a really good sharp needle, you probably don't need to do a jumping, or if your feed dogs move smoothly, that's all great. I find if I'm going slowly and I lift my foot every now and then, it just gives a chance for the fabrics to find their place in between those pins or clips. Oh, that's a decent match, I'd say. What do you think? Looks pretty good. We'll repeat for the other side. Get this out of the way. Okay, here's the piece that's been assembled, our units A and the 2 B's. And if I just lay this down, you'll see it wants to tie it kind of pushed in towards the center. But we might want to try pressing it open and see what that looks like, thinking that reducing the bulk might be advantageous. When I do this, there's actually a little more gap between my points than if I allow it to go into the center. I'm just going to finger press for a quick view of that. If I do press it into the center, I have an advantage for the next step, because then we will have a nestling of our seams in construction this way, since this has already been worked out in this direction. We can encourage these ones in, which appear to look better on the outside to me as well, and have this registration mark as well as this intersection for piecing it properly. So let's go ahead and do it that way and then examine for the next pressing step. We'll be adding our unit C in a similar way. We'll make our registration marks with the intersection of the flying geese in our C block and the center block, as well as the seams that are going to be nestled between the square in the center and our to create our hourglass pieces. So again, we'll use the clips. So I have my general point here. We'll clip this nestling section and we'll clip this nestling section. We're going to straighten the pin so it's perpendicular to the fabric and our layers, and put a clip on either side as well. We have extra fabric on here. We're just going to very gently align the edges so we have a starting point. Because we didn't trim the outside edges of our units, this is extra that we'll be working with for cleaning up. So I'm going to make this straight so that we get a 1/4 inch seam along here. There we go. Got a little extra fabric on this piece. Align that. We got lots of little clips in here, and we'll get rid of the pin. And we'll go very gently along this edge. Removing the clips as they become in the way, which is right away. Always stopping with the needle down. I'm going to give this a chance to kind of find its place, especially as I get closer. Little breathing room. You can feel the matching of the seams here. That feels good. Can feel a little bit of pushing there with the feed dogs, between the feed dogs and the foot. So I'm going to give it a little bit of space. All right. Oh, we've got a nice match. We've got our hourglasses being created here. This is just pushing the seam allowance to the outside, which is likely what we'll be doing. Feels like it just wants to go that way. So we'll add the other side and then take a final look at squaring up. All right, we've got both sides sewn on here, and I think it just seems to be best because of the bulk to press out. Let's see how that looks. Thinking it's looking pretty good. I'm going to give it a good hard press and then we can look at squaring up. All right, so we're going to be looking along this top line for a 1/4 inch on the points here, and the dots of this side. It's almost too many, but it's better to have two more than enough. We'll look for this diagonal line through here for squaring up, and then try to position it as even as we can. We can also use this mark here, the 1/4 inch from the 4 mark, because it's going to be 1/4 inch beyond. Let's see. Just tricky to see exactly where we want to go all the way around. We really want it as square as possible. And there's a little bit of warping just because of the grain, the bias on some of the triangles. It was difficult to get them all aligned. I think this is looking pretty good. I'm kind of checking this dotted line here too for that quarter. And the diagonal looks good. I'm going to go with that and these points here and see how that looks. It's reasonably straight. It's very bulky, it's very tippy, so it's going to be tricky to hold it nice and secure. Looking good. Let's give it a 90, a 180. And now we're looking for the 4.5, 4.5, 4.5. And hopefully that'll give us the points that we need. Looks really good along here on the top. And along the side, it's hard to see these ones, but I'm thinking that's pretty nice and straight. I see the tip of my ruler is chipped from all of the use. I'll have to use a better one. I got a couple. All right. Here we are. Our night and noon block. I hope yours has turned out nicely and you've enjoyed the process.